You will not believe what happens to the girl at the end. Make sure to like and subscribe so we can continue writing stories like this one. I would love to hear your thoughts in the comments below.
May stood on the porch, the weathered wood warm beneath her bare feet. The sun beat down on the sprawling acres that had been in her family for generations. But the warmth couldn't penetrate the chill in her heart. A scorned widow, that's what the townsfolk whispered. Scorned and soon to be homeless. Her husband, bless his wandering soul, though lately she questioned if it was truly blessed, had left her with more than just memories. He'd left her with debts. Mountains of them piled high like the hay bales in the north field. He gambled away their savings, their future, everything. The title of the story echoed in her mind, a cruel irony. True love? After everything? It seemed a distant, impossible dream. The only love she felt now was for this land, for the stubborn resilience of the wildflowers that pushed through the cracked earth, for the cattle that depended on her. She had one last card to play. A keepsake, a tarnished silver locket that had belonged to her grandmother. It held a tiny, faded picture of her great-grandparents on their wedding day. It was the only tangible link she had to the women who had come before her, women who had weathered storms and held this ranch together with grit and determination. Selling it felt like selling a piece of herself. But what choice did she have? The bank was breathing down her neck. If she didn't make a payment soon, they would take everything. And then what would she do? Where would she go? The thought sent a shiver down her spine, a cold reminder of her precarious situation. She clutched the locket in her hand, its smooth surface a small comfort in the face of overwhelming despair. This ranch, this land, it was more than just property, it was her legacy. The pawn shop bell jingled as May pushed open the door, the sound swallowed by the dusty interior. The air hung thick with the scent of forgotten dreams and tarnished hopes. Old guitars leaned against the wall, their strings silent. Jewelry glittered weakly under the dim lights, each piece a story untold. Behind the counter, a man with tired eyes and a salt and pepper mustache barely glanced up from his newspaper. "Help you, ma'am?" he grumbled, his voice raspy. May clutched the locket tighter. I need to sell something." Her voice wavered, betraying her inner turmoil. She placed the locket on the counter, the tarnished silver dull against the worn wood. The pawnbroker picked it up, examining it with a practiced eye. He flipped it open, peering at the faded photograph inside. "Family heirloom?" he asked, his voice softening slightly. May nodded, unable to speak. A lump formed in her throat, threatening to choke her. He weighed the locket in his hand, then named a price. It was far less than she had hoped, a pittance compared to its sentimental value. But she knew she had no choice. "I'll take it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. The pawnbroker counted out the money, placing it on the counter. May scooped it up, her fingers trembling. It wouldn't be enough to save the farm, but it would buy her a little more time. As she turned to leave, the pawnbroker cleared his throat. "Ma'am," he said, "I've seen a lot of things come and go through the shop. Sometimes things come back around. Don't lose hope." His words were a small spark in the darkness, a tiny flicker of encouragement. May managed a weak smile. "Thank you," she said, and stepped back out into the harsh sunlight, the weight of the money heavy in her pocket, but her heart even heavier. The locket was gone, a piece of her past traded for a sliver of hope for the future. Dust swirled around Jonah's worn boots as he rode into Harmony Creek. The town was small, a cluster of buildings huddled together against the vastness of the plains. He wasn't looking for much, just a place to rest his head for a night or two, maybe find some work to fill his empty pockets. He'd been drifting for months, ever since things fell apart back home. He preferred not to dwell on it. The past was a heavy weight, best left buried. He was a cowboy through and through. Years of riding, roping, and fixing fences had etched lines on his face and hardened his hands. He wasn't afraid of hard work, and he had a knack for seeing what needed fixing, whether it was a broken fence or a broken spirit. He reined in his horse, a sturdy Appaloosa named Scout, outside the general store. The scent of leather and coffee hung in the air, a welcome change from the open road. He dismounted, stretching his stiff muscles. As he tied Scout to the hitching post, he noticed a woman leaving the pawn shop across the street. Her shoulders were slumped, her eyes downcast. There was a sadness about her that resonated with him, a familiar ache in his own heart. He couldn't explain it, but he felt drawn to her, a sense that their paths were meant to cross. He hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach her. He wasn't one to intrude, but something compelled him forward. He straightened his hat, took a deep breath, and started across the street, hoping he wasn't making a mistake. Maybe he could offer her a kind word, a small gesture of comfort. He knew what it was like to carry a heavy burden, and sometimes just knowing you weren't alone could make all the difference. May hurried down the street, her eyes fixed on the dusty ground. She just wanted to get home. to escape the pitying glances and the whispers that followed her like a shadow. The money felt like a lead weight in her pocket, a constant reminder of her failure. She almost didn't notice the cowboy approaching her until he was right in front of her. He was tall, with kind eyes and a weathered face that spoke of hard work and long days in the sun. He wore a simple denim shirt and worn leather chaps, and his hat was pulled low, shading his eyes. "Excuse me, ma'am," he said, his voice gentle. "I couldn't help but notice you looked a little troubled." May stopped, startled. She didn't want to talk to anyone, didn't want to explain her situation or endure their sympathy. But there was something about this man's demeanor that put her at ease. He wasn't judging her, wasn't offering empty platitudes. He was simply acknowledging her pain. "It's nothing," she mumbled, trying to brush past him. He stepped aside, but his eyes held hers. "Sometimes," he said softly, "a kind word can make all the difference." He didn't press her, didn't demand an explanation. He just stood there, offering a silent, supportive presence. May hesitated. She didn't know this man, didn't know anything about him. But his simple act of kindness was a balm to her wounded spirit. "Thank you," she said, her voice barely audible. He nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "You take care now," he said. "And don't give up." He touched the brim of his hat and turned to leave, disappearing into the crowd. May watched him go, a flicker of hope igniting within her. A stranger offering kindness without expecting anything in return. It was a small thing, but it meant the world to her in that moment. Maybe, just maybe, things weren't as hopeless as they seemed. The setting sun cast long shadows across the fields as May drove the old pickup truck back to the homestead. The engine coughed and sputtered, a mechanical echo of her own weariness. The small amount of money she'd gotten for the locket felt insignificant against the looming debt. As she rounded the bend in the dirt road, she saw it. Another section of fence, collapsed and broken. The cattle were milling around, dangerously close to the open road. This was the last thing she needed. She slammed on the brakes, the truck skidding to a halt. She jumped out, her heart sinking. The fence was beyond a quick fix. It would take hours, maybe days, to repair properly. And she didn't have the time or the energy. Tears welled up in her eyes. It felt like everything was conspiring against her. The debts, the failing equipment, the relentless pressure from the bank, and now this. She sank down onto a nearby rock, burying her face in her hands. She didn't know what to do. She was tired, so tired. Suddenly she heard a horse approaching. She looked up, wiping her eyes, and saw the cowboy from town, the one who had offered her a kind word. He was riding slowly along the fence line, his gaze fixed on the damage. He reined in his horse and dismounted, approaching her with a quiet confidence. "Looks like you've got a problem here, ma'am," he said, his voice calm and steady. May nodded, unable to speak. "Mind if I take a look?" he asked. She shrugged, gesturing to the broken fence. "It's beyond repair," she said, her voice flat. "I don't know what I'm going to do." He walked along the fence line, examining the damage with a practiced eye. He ran his hand along the broken posts, assessing the situation. "It's not as bad as it looks," he said, turning back to her. "With a little work, I think we can get it fixed." His words were a lifeline, a small glimmer of hope in the face of overwhelming despair. For the first time in days, May felt a flicker of optimism. Maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone in this fight. "Are you sure?" May asked, her voice laced with disbelief. "I can't pay you much." Jonah shrugged. "I'm not looking for much," he said. "Just a place to rest my head and a good day's work." He unloaded his tools from Scout, a well-worn axe, a coil of wire, and a post-hole digger. He moved with a quiet efficiency, his movements economical and precise. He seemed to know exactly what to do. May watched him, her skepticism slowly fading. There was something about his competence that was reassuring. He wasn't just offering empty words, he was ready to roll up his sleeves and get to work. He spent the rest of the afternoon mending the fence, his muscles straining as he hammered in new posts and strung the wire tight. The sun beat down on his back, but he didn't complain. He just kept working, steadily and methodically. May helped where she could, handing him tools and holding the posts steady. It felt good to be doing something, to be fighting back against the despair that threatened to engulf her. As they worked side by side, a comfortable silence settled between them. They didn't talk much, but their shared effort created a connection, a sense of camaraderie. By sunset, the fence was mended, stronger than it had been before. The cattle were safely back in their pasture, and May could breathe a little easier. "Thank you," she said, her voice filled with gratitude. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Jonah smiled, wiping the sweat from his brow. "You would have figured it out," he said. "You seem like a resourceful woman." He paused, then added, "I could use a place to stay for a few nights, if you're willing to put me up." I can earn my keep. May hesitated for a moment. She wasn't used to having strangers around, but she knew she couldn't turn him away. He had saved her in more ways than one. You can stay, she said. I have a spare room in the house. Jonah nodded, his eyes meeting hers. Thank you, May, he said. I appreciate it. As they walked back to the house, side by side, May felt a sense of hope she hadn't felt in a long time. Maybe, just maybe, things were starting to look up. Days turned into weeks, and Jonah settled into a comfortable routine on the homestead. He rose before dawn, helping May with the morning chores, milking the cows, and feeding the chickens. He spent his days repairing fences, fixing broken equipment, and tending to the fields. He was a tireless worker, and May was grateful for his help. But it wasn't just his hard work that May appreciated. It was his quiet presence, his gentle nature. He never pried into her past, never asked about her late husband. He simply accepted her for who she was, a woman struggling to keep her head above water. She watched him as he worked, admiring his strength and his skill. He moved with a grace and confidence that she found captivating. He treated the animals with kindness, speaking to them in a soft voice, earning their trust. He was everything her late husband wasn't. John had been charming and charismatic, but he had also been reckless and irresponsible. He had promised her the world, but he had left her with nothing but debt and heartbreak. Jonah, on the other hand, was honest and dependable. He didn't make grand promises, but he showed her, through his actions, that he was someone she could rely on. She found herself drawn to his quiet strength, his unwavering optimism. He had a way of making her feel safe, of making her believe that things could get better. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, May found herself opening up to him, sharing her fears and her hopes. She told him about her late husband's gambling debts, about the pressure from the bank, about her fear of losing the homestead. Jonah listened patiently, his eyes filled with compassion. When she was finished, he reached out and took her hand, his touch gentle and reassuring. You're not alone in this, May, he said. I'm here to help you. His words were a balm to her wounded spirit. For the first time in a long time, May felt like she could breathe again. She wasn't alone. She had Jonah, and that made all the difference. The memory flickered like an old film reel, John, handsome and charming, twirling her around the dance floor at the town social. He had swept her off her feet, promising her a life of adventure and excitement. She had been young and naive, blinded by his charisma. She remembered the early years, filled with laughter and stolen kisses. They had worked side by side on the ranch, building a life together. But slowly, things had started to change. John had started spending more time in town, claiming he was meeting with business associates. But May suspected he was gambling. She confronted him, but he denied it, his eyes flashing with anger. The lies had piled up, one after another, until they formed an insurmountable wall between them. She had tried to reach him to salvage their marriage, but he had pushed her away. Then came the day she discovered the truth, the gambling debts, the secret loans, the mounting financial ruin. She had been devastated, betrayed by the man she had loved and trusted. He had apologized, begged for forgiveness, but the damage was done. The trust was broken, irreparable. She had asked him to leave, unable to bear the sight of him. He had died a few months later, in a car accident, leaving her with nothing but the debts he had accumulated. The townspeople whispered that it was a blessing in disguise, that she was better off without him. But May didn't feel blessed. She felt empty, betrayed, and alone. She had lost her husband, her dreams, and her financial security. Now, watching Jonah mend the fence, she couldn't help but compare him to John. Jonah was quiet and unassuming, but he was also honest and dependable. He didn't try to impress her with grand gestures, but he showed her, through his actions, that he was someone she could rely on. He was the opposite of John in every way. And that, May realized, was exactly what she needed. Someone who would be there for her, someone she could trust, someone who would help her rebuild her life. One evening, after a long day of work, Jonah sat with May on the porch, the crickets chirping their nightly song. The air was cool and still, carrying the scent of wildflowers and freshly cut hay. You never talk about your past, May said, her voice soft. I was just wondering. Jonah looked out at the darkening fields, his face etched with a hint of sadness. There's not much to tell, he said, his voice low. Everyone has a story, May persisted gently. He hesitated for a moment, then sighed. I used to have a ranch back in Texas, he said. A good ranch with good cattle. He paused as if reliving the memory. I was married, he continued, to a woman I loved very much. His voice caught in his throat. May waited patiently, sensing his pain. We lost a child, he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. A little girl. She was only a few months old. The grief in his voice was palpable. May reached out and took his hand, offering him silent comfort. My wife. She never recovered, he continued. She blamed me, blamed herself. We drifted apart. Eventually, she left. He looked down at his hands, his knuckles white. I sold the ranch, he said. Couldn't stand to be there anymore. I've been drifting ever since. He looked up at May, his eyes filled with a deep sorrow. I know what it's like to lose everything, he said. To feel like your heart is broken beyond repair. May squeezed his hand, her heart aching for his pain. She had shared her story with him, and now he had shared his with her. They were two broken souls finding solace in each other's company. Thank you for telling me, she said. It helps to know I'm not alone. Jonah smiled, a small, sad smile. You're not alone, May, he said. You'll never be alone. As they sat there in the darkness, holding hands, a bond formed between them, a bond of shared sorrow and mutual understanding. They were two lost souls finding their way back to the light together. The weeks that followed were filled with hard work and quiet companionship. Jonah continued to help May around the farm, his skills and strength proving invaluable. He repaired the barn roof, fixed the tractor, and even helped May plant a small vegetable garden. He seemed to anticipate her needs before she even voiced them. He was always there to lend a hand, offer a word of encouragement, or simply share a comforting silence. May, in turn, found herself drawn to his quiet strength and his gentle nature. She enjoyed his company, his stories, and his unwavering optimism. She found herself laughing again, something she hadn't done in a long time. She noticed the way he looked at her with a warmth and admiration that made her heart flutter. She wondered if he felt the same connection that she felt, if he, too, was starting to see a future for them together. One afternoon, as they were working in the garden, a cloud passed over the sun, casting a shadow over the field. Looks like we're in for some rain, Jonah said, wiping the sweat from his brow. Maybe, May said, looking up at the sky. Or maybe it'll pass. They continued to work in silence for a few minutes. Then Jonah spoke again. May, he said, his voice hesitant. I've been meaning to tell you. He paused, as if searching for the right words. May waited patiently, her heart pounding in her chest. I've enjoyed my time here, he continued. More than I can say. You're a strong, kind woman, and I'm starting to care about you. He looked down at his hands, his cheeks flushed. May reached out and took his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. I care about you too, Jonah, she said, her voice soft. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with hope. Does that mean? May smiled, her heart overflowing with happiness. It means, she said, that maybe, just maybe, we can build something together. Jonah smiled back, his eyes shining with tears. He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tentative kiss that spoke volumes. It was a kiss filled with hope, with longing, and with the promise of a brighter future. Their newfound happiness was a fragile thing, a delicate flower blooming in the harsh landscape of May's life. The debt still loomed, the bank still threatened, and the memories of John's betrayal still lingered. But with Jonah by her side, May felt stronger, more resilient. She knew that they could face whatever challenges came their way together. One afternoon, as they were returning from town, they saw a familiar figure standing by the side of the road, near the entrance to the homestead. It was Clem, a burly man with a shifty gaze and a reputation for being a bully. He had been circling the homestead for weeks, trying to buy it for a fraction of its worth. What do you want, Clem? May asked, her voice firm. Clem smirked, his eyes raking over May and Jonah. Just thought I'd stop by and see how you're doing, May, he said, his voice dripping with false concern. Heard you're having a little trouble with the bank. That's none of your business, May retorted. Well, it is my business if you're going to lose the farm, Clem said, stepping closer. I'm offering you a fair price, May. More than you'll get from anyone else. I'm not selling, May said, her voice unwavering. Clem's smile faded, replaced by a sneer. You're making a mistake, May, he said. This farm is too much for you to handle on your own. You'll never make it. I'm not alone, May said, glancing at Jonah. Clem's eyes narrowed. Who's this, your new hired hand? He sneered. He won't be around for long. You can't trust anyone, May. Especially not drifters. Jonah stepped forward, his eyes blazing with anger. You watch your mouth, Clem, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You're talking to the woman I care about. Clem laughed, a harsh, grating sound. So, you're sweet on her, are you? Well, you're wasting your time. She's cursed, just like this farm. Everyone who gets close to her ends up losing everything. May gasped, her face paling. Clem's words were like a knife to her heart, dredging up all her insecurities and fears. But Jonah stood firm, his arm around May's shoulders. "Don't listen to him, May," he said, his voice gentle. "He's just trying to scare you. He's not worth your time." He turned to Clem, his eyes filled with contempt. "Get off this property, Clem," he said, "and don't come back." Clem glared at them for a moment, then spat on the ground and stalked away, muttering threats under his breath. May trembled, her heart pounding in her chest. Clem's words had shaken her to her core, but Jonah's presence, his strength, and his unwavering support gave her the courage to stand tall. She wasn't alone. She had Jonah, and that made all the difference. That night, after Clem's unsettling visit, May and Jonah sat on the porch, the silence heavy with unspoken fears. The stars twinkled in the vast, dark sky, but May found no comfort in their beauty. Clem's words had burrowed deep into her soul, stirring up her insecurities and doubts. "He's right, you know," May said softly, her voice barely audible. "I am cursed. Everyone who gets close to me ends up losing everything." Jonah turned to her, his eyes filled with concern. "Don't talk like that, May," he said, his voice gentle but firm. "You're not cursed. You're a strong, resilient woman who's been through a lot. But that doesn't mean you're destined to be unhappy." "But it's true," May insisted, tears welling up in her eyes. "John lost everything because of me. And now I'm afraid I'm going to drag you down with me." Jonah took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. "You're not going to drag me down, May," he said. "I'm not afraid of hard work, and I'm not afraid of a challenge. And I'm certainly not afraid of you." He paused, then added, "I care about you, May. More than I've cared about anyone in a long time. And I'm not going to let anyone, including you, convince me that we don't have a future together." His words were like a lifeline, pulling her back from the brink of despair. She looked at him, her heart overflowing with gratitude. He believed in her even when she didn't believe in herself. "Thank you, Jonah," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "Thank you for being here for me." He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'll always be here for you, May," he said. "No matter what." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, finding solace in his embrace. The fear didn't disappear completely, but it lessened, replaced by a growing sense of hope. She wasn't alone. She had Jonah. And with him by her side, she knew that she could face whatever challenges lay ahead. They sat there for a long time, watching the stars and listening to the crickets, their silence filled with unspoken love and commitment. The night was still dark, but for the first time in a long time, May saw a glimmer of light on the horizon. A light that promised a brighter future, a future filled with love, hope, and happiness. A future that she and Jonah could build together. A few days later, the bank representative arrived, a stern-faced man in a dark suit. He walked with a measured pace, his eyes scanning the property with a calculating gaze. "Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice devoid of warmth. "I'm here to inform you that your loan is in default. We're initiating foreclosure proceedings." May's heart sank. She had known this was coming, but hearing the words spoken aloud felt like a death sentence. "I've been trying to make payments," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "I sold my last keepsake. I'm doing everything I can." "I understand, Mrs. Evans," the representative said, his voice unmoved. "But the bank has its policies. We can't make exceptions." He handed her a stack of papers, his eyes fixed on the horizon. "You have 30 days to vacate the property," he said. "After that, we'll take possession." He turned and walked back to his car, leaving May standing alone in the dust, the foreclosure papers clutched in her trembling hands. Jonah watched from the porch, his face etched with anger. He strode over to May, his arm around her shoulders. "What did he say?" he asked, his voice low. May showed him the papers, her eyes filled with tears. Jonah read them, his jaw tightening. 30 days, he said, his voice filled with disbelief. "That's not enough time." "I know," May said, her voice breaking. "I don't know what we're going to do." Jonah took a deep breath, his eyes filled with determination. "We're not giving up, May," he said. "We're going to fight this. We're going to find a way to save this farm." He looked at her, his eyes shining with hope. "We can do this, May," he said. "Together." He pulled her close, and she rested her head on his shoulder, finding strength in his embrace. The fight was far from over, but with Jonah by her side, May felt a flicker of hope rekindled within her. They weren't giving up. They were going to fight for their future, for their love, and for their home. They would find a way. They had to. The weight of the foreclosure notice pressed down on them both. They knew they needed a plan, a miracle, anything to change their fate. Jonah started taking on extra jobs, helping out at other ranches, mending fences, anything to earn a few extra dollars. May worked tirelessly on the farm, trying to increase their output, selling eggs and vegetables at the local market. One evening, exhausted but determined, they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the sky in vibrant hues of orange and pink. The beauty of the moment was a stark contrast to the bleakness of their situation. "What are we going to do, Jonah?" May asked, her voice filled with worry. "I don't see how we can possibly save the farm in 30 days. Jonah took her hand, his touch calloused but gentle. "We're going to figure it out, May," he said, his voice filled with conviction. "We're not giving up. We're going to try everything we can." He paused, then added, "I've been thinking maybe we could ask the community for help. Maybe they'd be willing to lend us some money or help us with the harvest." May hesitated. She had always been fiercely independent, reluctant to ask for help. But she knew that Jonah was right. They couldn't do this alone. "I don't know, Jonah," she said. "It's hard for me to ask for help." "I know," Jonah said, squeezing her hand. "But you're not alone in this, May. You have friends, people who care about you. They'll want to help." He looked at her, his eyes filled with warmth and admiration. "And you have me," he said. "I'm not going anywhere. We're in this together." His words were a source of strength and comfort. May looked at him, her heart overflowing with love. She had never met anyone like Jonah, anyone so kind, so selfless, so willing to fight for her. "Thank you, Jonah," she said, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what I would do without you." He smiled, a warm, genuine smile that reached his eyes. "You don't have to worry about that, May," he said. "I'm not going anywhere." He leaned in and kissed her, a tender, lingering kiss that sealed their commitment to each other. As they sat there watching the sunset, they made a pact. They would fight for their farm, for their love, and for their future. They would ask for help, they would work tirelessly, and they would never give up hope. They would face whatever challenges lay ahead together. They had to. Their future depended on it. The next morning, they went into town, determined to ask for help. They started by visiting the general store where they explained their situation to Mrs. Henderson, the owner, a kind-hearted woman who had known May since she was a little girl. Mrs. Henderson listened patiently, her face etched with concern. When they were finished, she reached out and took May's hand. "Don't you worry, dear," she said, her voice filled with warmth. "We're not going to let you lose this farm. This community sticks together." She put out a donation jar on the counter and promised to spread the word. May and Jonah then went to the diner where they spoke to Betty, the waitress who had always been a good friend to May. Betty, too, was eager to help. She organized a bake sale and a raffle, promising to donate all the proceeds to May's cause. Word spread quickly through the town, and soon everyone was pitching in. People donated money, offered their time, and provided food and supplies. The community rallied around May and Jonah, showing them that they were not alone. One evening, as they were returning from town, they saw a group of people gathered in front of their house. It was the community come to show their support. They had brought food, blankets, and tools. They had organized a work party to help with the harvest. They had even hired a lawyer to look into May's case. May was overwhelmed by their generosity. Tears streamed down her face as she thanked them, her voice choked with emotion. "I don't know what to say," she said. "I'm so grateful. I never thought." "We knew you could do it, May," Mrs. Henderson exclaimed, beaming with pride. "Thank you all," May said, her voice thick with emotion. "You have no idea what this means to me." The community worked tirelessly alongside May and Jonah, helping with the harvest, repairing the buildings, and tending to the animals. The farm came alive with activity, filled with laughter and camaraderie. But even with all their efforts, they still didn't have enough money to pay off the debt. The deadline was fast approaching, and the threat of foreclosure loomed large. On the day the bank was scheduled to take possession of the farm, May and Jonah stood on the porch, watching as the bank representative drove up the long, dusty road. Their hearts sank. They had done everything they could, but it wasn't enough. The representative stepped out of his car, his face as stern and unyielding as ever. He walked over to May and handed her a final notice. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Evans," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "But the bank has made its decision. We're taking possession of the property." May looked at Jonah, her eyes filled with despair. He took her hand, his grip firm and reassuring. "It's not over yet, May," he said, his voice filled with determination. "We're not giving up." He turned to the representative, his eyes blazing with anger. "You can't do this," he said. "This farm means everything to her. It's her home, her legacy." The representative shrugged, his face unmoved. "I'm just following orders," he said. He turned to leave, but suddenly a voice rang out from the crowd. "Wait." Everyone turned to see Mr. Peterson, May's lawyer, hurrying towards them, a stack of papers in his hand. I have an injunction, he exclaimed, his voice filled with triumph. The bank can't foreclose on this property. What's going on? The bank representative asked, his face contorted with anger. There's been a legal technicality, Mr. Peterson explained, his voice calm and authoritative. The bank failed to properly notify Mrs. Evans of certain aspects of the loan agreement. The foreclosure is temporarily suspended. A collective cheer erupted from the crowd. May looked at Jonah, her eyes filled with disbelief and gratitude. But that only buys us more time, she said, her voice trembling. We still don't have enough money to pay off the debt. Jonah smiled, a knowing smile that made her heart flutter. He stepped forward and reached into his pocket, pulling out a thick wad of cash. I do, he said, his voice filled with confidence. May stared at him, her mouth agape. Where did you get that? She asked, her voice barely a whisper. I've been working extra jobs, Jonah explained, his eyes fixed on hers. Mending fences, breaking horses, anything to earn a few extra dollars. I've been saving every penny. He handed the money to May, his touch warm and reassuring. It's not much, he said, but it's enough to pay off the debt. Tears streamed down May's face as she counted the money. It was true. It was just enough to save the farm. But why, she asked, her voice choked with emotion. Why would you do this for me? Jonah stepped closer, his eyes filled with love and tenderness. Because I care about you, May, he said. More than I've ever cared about anyone. And I want to see you happy. I want to see you save this farm. He paused, then added. And because this isn't just your dream, May. It's my dream too. He reached out and took her hand, his grip firm and unwavering. Let's pay off this debt, he said. Let's save this farm. Let's build a future together. May looked at him, her heart overflowing with love and gratitude. She knew that she had found something truly special in Jonah, a love that was stronger than any obstacle, a love that would last forever. Together, May and Jonah walked into the bank, the wad of cash clutched tightly in May's hand. Mrs. Henderson, Betty, and several other members of the community followed close behind, offering their support. The bank representative looked surprised to see them, his face etched with a mixture of anger and confusion. What's going on? He asked, his voice curt. We're here to pay off the debt, May said, her voice filled with newfound confidence. She placed the money on the counter, her eyes meeting the representative's gaze. He counted it carefully, his expression unchanged. It's all here, he said finally, his voice devoid of emotion. The loan is paid in full. A collective cheer erupted from the crowd. May and Jonah looked at each other, their hearts overflowing with joy. They had done it. They had saved the farm. As they walked out of the bank, hand in hand, the community surrounded them, showering them with congratulations and well wishes. We knew you could do it, May, Mrs. Henderson exclaimed, beaming with pride. You're an inspiration to us all, Betty added, her eyes filled with admiration. May and Jonah smiled, their hearts filled with gratitude. They had faced seemingly insurmountable odds, but with the help of their community and their unwavering love for each other, they had overcome them. They returned to the farm, their hearts lighter than they had been in years. The sun shone brightly on the fields, the cattle grazed peacefully in the pasture, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of wildflowers. The farm was saved. Their love had triumphed. Their future was bright. That evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, May leaned her head on Jonah's shoulder, her heart filled with contentment. Thank you, Jonah, she said, her voice soft and filled with love. Thank you for everything. Jonah smiled back, his arm tightening around her. Thank you, May, he said, for giving me a reason to stay, for giving me a home. He leaned in and kissed her, a gentle, tender kiss that spoke volumes. It was a kiss filled with love, gratitude, and the promise of a lifetime together. A few weeks later, the community organized a barn dance to celebrate May and Jonah's newfound happiness and the revitalization of the homestead. The barn was decorated with colorful banners and twinkling lights, and the air was filled with the sound of music and laughter. Everyone in town came to the dance dressed in their finest Western attire. May wore a beautiful blue dress that Mrs. Henderson had made for her, and Jonah looked handsome in his cowboy boots and Stetson hat. As they danced the night away, surrounded by their friends and neighbors, May and Jonah couldn't help but smile. They had faced seemingly insurmountable odds, but they had overcome them thanks to their love for each other and the support of their community. Clem watched from the sidelines, his face etched with envy and resentment. He had hoped to profit from May's misfortune, but his plan had backfired. She had found love and happiness, and he was left with nothing but bitterness. As the night drew to a close, May and Jonah stood on the porch, watching as the last of their guests departed. The stars twinkled in the vast, dark sky, and the air was filled with the sweet scent of wildflowers. I never thought I could be this happy again, May said, her voice filled with emotion. Jonah took her hand, his touch warm and reassuring. You deserve to be happy, May, he said. You're a wonderful woman, and I'm so lucky to have you in my life. He pulled her close, and they shared a tender kiss, sealing their love and commitment to each other. The farm was saved, their hearts were mended, and their future was bright. They had found true love in the most unexpected of places, and they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, their new life had begun. Time passed, seasons changed, and the homestead flourished under May and Jonah's loving care. They worked side by side, their partnership growing stronger with each passing day. They expanded the vegetable garden, added more cattle to the herd, and even started a small bed and breakfast to welcome visitors to their beautiful farm. They learned to rely on each other, to support each other, and to love each other unconditionally. They had found true happiness in the most unexpected of places, and they were grateful for every moment they shared. One sunny afternoon, as they were sitting on the porch, watching the children from the town play in the fields, Jonah turned to May, his eyes filled with love. I have something to ask you, he said, his voice soft. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He opened it, revealing a sparkling diamond ring. May, he said, his voice choked with emotion. Will you marry me? Tears streamed down May's face as she nodded, her heart overflowing with joy. Yes, Jonah, she said, her voice barely audible. Yes, I will marry you. He slipped the ring on her finger, his touch warm and reassuring. He pulled her close, and they shared a long, tender kiss, sealing their love and commitment to each other. Their wedding was a small, intimate affair, held in the little church in town, surrounded by their closest friends and family. Mrs. Henderson baked the cake, Betty sang a beautiful song, and Mr. Peterson officiated the ceremony. As they exchanged their vows, May and Jonah looked at each other, their hearts overflowing with love and gratitude. They had found their way back to happiness, back to each other. Years passed, and May and Jonah's love continued to grow stronger with each passing day. The farm flourished, their family expanded, and their lives were filled with joy and contentment. One sunny afternoon, May and Jonah were working side by side in the vegetable garden, their hands calloused but their hearts full. They were planting seeds, nurturing new life, just as they had nurtured their love and their dreams. The sun shone brightly on their faces, warming their skin and illuminating their smiles. They looked at each other, their eyes filled with love and gratitude. They had faced great loss, they had endured hardship, but they had emerged stronger and more resilient than ever before. They had found true love in the most unexpected of places, and they had built a life together that was filled with joy, happiness, and unwavering commitment. As they worked in the garden, their hands touching, their hearts intertwined, they knew that they had found everything they had ever wanted, right here, on this small farm in Harmony Creek. They had proven that love and second chances are possible even after great loss. And they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead, together, hand in hand, heart to heart, forever. Their story was a testament to the power of love, the strength of community, and the enduring hope that can blossom even in the most barren of landscapes. It was a story of rebuilding, of rediscovering, and of finding true happiness in the arms of a kind-hearted cowboy.